We're live. Greetings, I'm Dr. Al Freeman. Thank you for joining us on today's Early Childhood Consultant Zoom, live from Phoenix, Arizona at Best Practices. We actually have Mary here live with us too over there. We've got our two speakers today, Rusty Huseman, attorney at law. He always likes to throw that around all the time, right?
Doctor.
So, yes, Dr. Rusty.
JD, baby.
There we go. That's right. And Rusty's also the initiator of the Lutheran Legal League. So if you haven't been online to the LutheranLegalLeague.org.
Correct.
Sometimes I go .com and then I
know.
get redirected.
That's org.
But I really encourage you to go to LutheranLegalLeague.org and check it out. The Lutheran Legal League is growing all the time and is an RSO, which brings me to the Deaconess Dorothy Kranz, who's Director of Recognized Service Organizations for the LCMS. And Dorothy and Rusty are here today to talk to us about, and I can see Rusty's screen here, thankfully, so I know the exact title, Structuring a Christian School, Legal and Operational Considerations. Wow, what a title that is.
I mean, I'm glad you gave it to me.
It just rolls right off, doesn't it?
Yes.
And really, this is coming from, we have, and when I say we, Dorothy and I have had quite a few phone calls, emails, asking about 501c3s, 508s, and if the early childhood should be separate from the congregation or you name it. So we'll discuss several of those things today with Rusty and Dorothy, and they'll give you takes. Like always, if you have questions, feel free to type those in chat, and you can always raise your hand as well. Before I turn it over to Rusty and Dorothy, let me open us in prayer, and then we'll get going. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this wonderful, glorious day, and we give you thanks for all of our early childhood consultants, the amazing work that they do as they care for your workers, your early childhood directors and educators, and all those who serve our early childhoods and doing your work each and every day. We give you thanks for the blessing of all of our Lutheran schools, the spreading of your precious gospel message. We give you thanks for Rusty and Dorothy and their work and their willingness to help us and guide us through the discussion today, and all of their efforts as they support your ministries so that they can thrive and spread that gospel message. Be with us in all things as we do all glory to you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And with that, I'm going to pop Rusty's PowerPoint up on the screen and share it here and turn it over to the expert when it comes to this discussion.
Do you know what an expert is?
Well, you know,
Dr. Freeman, expert, X is an unknown quantity, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. So that may be true for me.
That's why I call you the expert. And I think we're ready to go. I see it on the screen here,
all right.
So we're up.
Okay, cool. Dr. Freeman asked me to get this out to pretty much everyone because, quite frankly, and I'm not sure where this conversation started back, and we started getting calls back in, I don't know, maybe last year, October, November. Yeah. And so this is all coming out. It's kind of a strange time for us to be looking at this, but it's a good time because there's issues that we need to address. So let's go ahead and just pound right into it. Why does the decision really matter if we're going to be a standalone or if we're going to be part of the church ministry? And in order to evaluate that, you have to ask yourself these questions, pretty much these four topics here of governance, financial response, sustainability, legal protections, ministry, and community. And when you're looking at that, you have to figure out, okay, well, who's going to govern? Is it going to be the church?
Here, Rusty, because my slides are not syncing with your slides. And I'm on a have you heard a good lawyer joke lately, but
a good lawyer joke is an oxymoron.
Let's see if I can find.
Should be the second slide.
Yeah, I got you all the way back to the front here.
So. Yeah, but it was here. This is what I'm on.
That is not it. That's the wrong. Let's put the right one in there.
Okay.
It's so anyway. It was good talking to you guys.
We're off to a great start.
We're really,
Did I mention that we're live?
and did I mention this is all a lie? Everything we're telling you is a lie.
Whoop, let me stop the share. And we'll get this figured out here shortly.
In the interest of time, I can go ahead and just
You
kind
can
of
go ahead and start. Just give me
out.
the right.
Yeah, it's the last one. Let me time out. We're going to a commercial.
Structure there. Oh, how did I get the other one? That's weird. I don't know which one I called up. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
Now we're good.
Okay,
Go to the next slide.
go to the next slide, and it should say why decision matters.
Hang on, let me go here.
This is what you get when you're a doctor.
That's right.
That's why we have
You know,
Will
what
here.
you know what you get when you're a doctor? Patience.
Patience, yes. I haven't gotten that yet.
See, that's. Oh, we're close. Have I mentioned that we're at best practices? And, oh, look at this.
Got it?
I do. Okay.
All right.
Next slide.
There
We're
we go.
good?
Look at that.
Yes, okay. So, back what I was saying. So, when you're looking at these four categories, if you will, these really are decision markers, you need to figure out who's going to govern and how's that going to be governed. Under our traditional model, that's done pretty much through the church, but it's also done through a separate board. In many of our schools, they have a school board, and they also have the church school, the church council that they deal with. So you need to figure that out. Which one's going to be the most beneficial for you at that time, and then how are we going to financially sustain the ministry? We call it the ministry. How are we going to sustain it? Are we going to have any benefits? But the sustaining of that, also you have to look at the costs of sustaining it. So we got to look at all the financial obligations as well. And then which model, 501c3 or 508, is actually going to be the best model for your ministry. So our ministry maybe in Dallas says, we're going to be 501c3, but a ministry in Florida says, no, we're going to just stay as part of a 508. We'll explain all this momentarily, because the legal protections and what you get from Senate really make a difference here, and I really want you all to hear this. It's very, very important. And then finally, can a 501c3 be so mission-minded that it's considered a Christian school? We have several Christian schools in Florida, the University Christian, Episcopal Christian, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you have them in your ministries. But that level of church involvement that you get there is really important if you're trying to stay and create a ministry theme, right? Otherwise, we don't have that. All right. The common structures we've talked about, really only the two that we're going to talk about is a standalone 501c3. And why do we want to do that? Well, you need to understand the difficulties with a 501c3 too. It's not just a cakewalk, we can do what we want. Most of us now, this term of a 508, that's not really anything new. That's what we've been doing for 100 years, however long we've been in Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. And from that perspective, what I mean by that is a church and a school that's attached to that church ministry is already a 508. You don't have to apply for anything. We'll get into that in a second. What is really important for you to understand is, in order for you to be a 501c3 and have a school on church property, there's a lot of things that have to happen. We're going to figure out, do we need a lease, and are you going to be that separate? Or if you're going to be part of our ministry, and we need to build this out so that it has some legal protections. We'll talk about those again in
just quick question from my perspective here, just a little bit. We're talking about 501c3, 508, we're talking federal tax code.
Correct.
And so does that equate to states at all? Or I just want to...
We're going to be getting into that.
I
Very
just wanna
great.
make sure
You read
because
ahead. Thank
just
you very
wanna-
much.
I did my homework.
Just to bring up one other thing, for majority of our schools, they and congregations are under Synod's 501c3 group exemption ruling.
That is correct.
So they're not even holding their own 501c3 basically. They're under our group exemption ruling, and then every year Synod has to report that to the IRS.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which, just for clarity here for everyone, If you need the 501c3 under the church exemption, we have that in our handbooks.
It's on the website too.
It's on the website.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. And also, if you want to find out about 501c3s and 508s, I just
Yeah.
kind of brought that up because
Yeah.
all federal, it's out there, it's searchable,
Yes.
so you can find all this information
Yes.
readily available.
And I tried to summarize it because, well, I know Al Freeman, and he, I can't use big words, so.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the next slide. Understanding a 501c3 school. This is where it's really important for you to understand. A 501c3 must be a completely separate organization from our church ministry. That creates problems, but you have to apply, you have to be approved. Now, sometimes you can apply for a 501c3, and if you don't get any earnings the first year and you don't file a 990 return, you can also lose your 501c3 status. So we got to be real careful with that. And then you really want to pay attention to how do you want this, and we'll go back to that word governed, a board of directors. You will have to have a complete full board of directors, and that you will have to have officers that are overseeing the entire operation. So what are we talking about? A completely operational business. That's what we're talking about on a 501c3. And most of the time, we'll look at that and say, well, that business, and that doesn't really flow with the way we understand ministry. But there are advantages. We'll see that in just a second.
With that, you're talking about articles of incorporation,
Bylaws,
state
yes,
filings.
correct.
So there's really several steps.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
And you have to continually update your filing, as all of our churches should, so you need to make sure that's being done with the state filing, because if you're administratively dissolved, then you can't answer, complaints and stuff like that.
So like all tax stuff, this isn't just quick, easy, I
No.
can start one today and boom,
No,
there
it is not. It's not as simple as that. I wish it were.
I don't want to, you might have this on a slide ahead because I should have done all my homework to see that, but I haven't. What if, can the church be its own 501c3 and then I can have a separate 501c3 that's early childhood or the school?
Sure.
Can the church be a 508 and the school is a 501c3?
Yes.
So there's a multitude of, it can get messy. You just have to
can.
make sure that you are following the right process.
Correct.
And the annual filings and updates and everything else.
We have, and this is the danger, and I know you can speak to this in some of your congregations, and those of you out there, I'm sure you've heard these horror stories, but we've come across churches that said, we just think it's better for us to separate. And we want to have, our church will still want to be affiliated here. Some of those churches have so far removed from the ministry of the school that they have gone rogue. And they don't communicate with the synod, with the church. They're not filing reports as they should, and this creates a real big issue for us in the legal considerations, as we'll talk about later on. And that's really why I'm here. If we were talking about donations, we can get somebody else to talk about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So.
Well, and it's so true. And Dorothy and I have been getting all these questions, and we call and we find out, and that's why we thought it's so timely here, because we know more and more of this will come forth as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even for those preschools or schools to have their own 501c3, now they're sitting as a separate entity, which means for them to qualify for any benefits as a congregation school of calling workers,
That's right.
Concordia plans, LCEF loans using Synod's logo, that requires them, if they want, they need to have RSO status in order to maintain those benefits.
And I don't think we can drive that point home. You can't be
Right.
on, we should not be on an LCMS campus and have a separate 501c3. And if you do that, and that's fine,
That's fine.
we have to really document the fire out of it because of the legal implications of doing that.
Right.
So some of the advantages of a 501c3 is decision making. They are autonomous, so they can do whatever they need to do, which is an advantage, also a disadvantage for us as a ministry. And there are much more funding opportunities in a 501c3 because people will look at that and say, well, I'm not supporting the Lutherans, I'm supporting Christian education. And that might give us some opportunity for some more cash. And then broader community engagement, because people will see that as they're really reaching out. And here's the juxtaposition. If we have a 501c3 on the property of St. Paul Lutheran Church, do you think that 501c3 school is not being considered by the community as a Lutheran school?
Yeah. Well, and I will say, so, some of the Funding Academy or funding Zoom sessions that we ran one not long ago talking about vouchers and tax credits
Right.
and so on. One of the things we say is chase the mission and the ministry, don't
Yes.
chase the money.
Absolutely.
And you've consistently been saying this through
Yes.
every slide so far is
Yeah.
think about your ministry and
That's
ministry engagement. Don't start thinking about, some of these other things that can pull your eyes away
Right.
from that mission on ministry.
And that's what happens when the congregation goes through its, let's call it what it is, its death cycle, and they have a robust school, and the school is all of a sudden, why are we funding the church? Because that's our ministry. Our ministry is a ministry of Christ's love that we have to share. It's not just a ministry of that church and this school.
Yeah.
It's a global
One ministry mentality too. of
Exactly.
It's not church,
Yeah,
school.
exactly.
It's church and
school.
or one.
And I want to be clear to all of those folks out there that if you're truly interested in a 501c3, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk with you privately offline and give you some horror stories that you need to hear, but also some of the benefits. It depends on where you want to go. You can expand your 501c3 and have multiple campuses if that's what you wanted to do. And that might be a good 501c3. But most of our congregations have a church and a school on one property. Okay. The next thing we need to discuss, since we talked about the good stuff, let's talk about the bad stuff, and that is the challenges of being a 501c3. And that is, you own it all. You are part of the program or you're not part of the program. And the governance and legal compliance and financial responsibilities are on you. You can't come back to the church and go, well, can you guys help? Nope, you're autonomous. Fundraising reliance, again, you're now not worrying about the church funding, but for schools, we have big schools in our system that are doing perfectly fine, as is the church, because it's one ministry, Al, as you said. That creates a sustainable revenue stream when you have a 501c3 and you are combining that with other revenue sources. But it has a weaker legal protection, and that's really what I wanted to focus on today. We've all heard these, we're going to hear about them again in a minute, but ministerial exception, I've been harping on it since the Hosanna Tabor case. I've talked to the SLED folks last year, we're going to do it again. That is a case that we have to be mindful of. We cannot lose our ministerial exception. If we do that, your 501c3 Christian school could go down the toilet.
Yeah.
All right, real world example, as we talked about, University Christian, they have a campus and they have 2 satellite places that they lease. That's a large Christian academy, and they have good community involvement. So they're doing financially, they're doing very well. They have a good endowment, they're raising funds, and so that is a way the 501c3 can be successful.
And an RSO, right?
And
that
an, oh yes,
University
yes,
Christian was
great point.
RSO as well.
And again, you can't be, well, we'll get into that in a second, because I'm here now at the 508. So we are already a 508. Where people started asking about a 508, how this even came up, I'm perplexed, because when you open a church, automatically every state in the country by law has to say, you're tax exempt, you are a religious organization, as long as you can prove it, you're good. Well, if you hire clergy, you hire called workers, you're a church. That's how we roll. It operates and has much more of a issue with funding. That's one of the downsides. We'll get into that in a second. But you don't have to apply to do anything. You don't have to apply for the state. You don't have to apply to the IRS for tax exemption. As Dorothy said, we already fall under the national, under the Synod's guideline, although we do have some churches that have done their own 501c3, and that's fine, it doesn't hurt. But you don't need to apply, and you're not governed by by some of the onerous regulations, but you do have to deal with the church council, And that has been where most of us, I think, see some issues. Okay, let's moving on to the advantages of that are, again, no application, you still have your tax exempt status. I still submit to you that our churches are more than capable of supporting our schools if they have a one-mind ministry. But we have so many aging congregations that it's like, well, I don't want the kids screaming and making noise. Well, this is what we need right now. We need that noise. We need them to hear the gospel.
Yeah, I think it's that mission-mindedness, and Will and I have been talking about stability markers that we know are out there for Lutheran schools, and I think that's one of the stability markers, right? Yep. What's the purpose of the school? What's the foundation that we're built on? Yeah. And if it's there, we have amazing things that can be accomplished.
Exactly.
But if you're going in different directions, it's very tough to have that continuity and that mission that is overarching everything.
Right. One of the issues that we had with some of the church separations after the church and the school started to migrate separately was, well, now that we're running everything, I need a stipend. So now the money that was supposed to go to children education is going to pay the educators, which is legal, it's okay, but to pay the administrators of the board. So board stipends, and I just find that appalling. The biggest key is we have much greater legal protections if you are a 508, if you are part of a church ministry, and again, we'll come to talk about that. But the challenges are, again, the control. I mention that because I don't know how many calls you get, like the church won't let me do this, or they're keep interfering with the school board. That's why you call Dr. Freeman and let him kind of bring in some ideas. Well, yes, call Dorothy. Bring in those ideas that will help bring unity to that situation.
Well, and that's what our early childhood consultants do too. I mean, that's our first line of defense. District, early childhood consultants, trying to work with them and figure out a plan. Would you say that's the case too, Mary?
Absolutely, and our accredited schools will typically do much better.
Yes.
Because they've gone through this process together as one ministry. And we're talking about purpose and mission, and all your stakeholders are aligned, and they're making a plan together for 5 years. I mean, those are typically the more sustainable ministries.
Right.
And they update every year on that plan so that they address this progress on it. And that's a great point. I wasn't even going down that path, but thanks for the shout out for NLSA, because having you work on it and kind of redesign that too, that's one of the great purposes for that. So
okay,
tremendous.
So one of the things, and I put it down here, that the church is ultimately liable, and that is true, but usually our churches and our schools have complementary insurances. So really, if a lawsuit comes up, you're probably not going to sue. You're going to sue the church because it is the corporate mission. It is the corporate,
right?
Yeah, I've never seen one with deep pockets, but it is usually that entity that is called into question. But they're going to go back and they're going to say, well, what does the insurance company say? So again,
which is interesting, because anytime somebody calls and there's an issue, and let's say that you're being sued for some reason, my response is, have you contacted your insurance company? A lot of times insurance companies will have an attorney, then they appoint to the case.
That's exactly right.
And it also goes to my second question I always ask them, have you talked to an attorney?
Exactly.
And a lot of times that's Lutheran Legal League, somebody's out there for that initial consultation to say, hey, where do I turn or go? But anyway, that's a shout out to that
L3.
as well.
Appreciate it. I will tell you, I get probably 3 calls a month in that regard, and there have been times since I also serve as the Florida Georgia District Counsel, that I will call the attorney back who's bringing the lawsuit, and he's suing because somebody complained that they said something in a sermon they didn't like, whatever it was. And I said, what are you hoping to get out of this? Are you looking for a censure, or are you looking for money? Well, my client's not happy and he can't find another church, and now he has to drive, so you're looking for money? Good luck. It's not going to happen. The church has no money. Even if it had money, it's got insurance. Go there. And 99% of the time, the good attorneys will drop the case because they're like, you're not going to get anything. How will you sue? What are you going to get? You get nothing. So, okay. Real world example, or I could just cite all of our Lutheran churches that have schools. And we have so many that have blessed to bless the future generations of not just Christian kids, but disciple makers. That's what's so cool about it. And then the shared facilities, I can't emphasize that enough. It is expensive in real estate out there. In my real world where I work in the real estate law, you can't, most schools would not be able to afford to buy the dirt right now. Then they've got to, if they're going to be part of the LCMS, they've got to apply for RSO. And it's a process. It takes, what, 6 months to a year, give or take. And there are benefits. But are the benefits of the RSO in this setting, do they outweigh the responsibility? And I would say probably not. And that's just Rusty's opinion, although I do believe in RSO world. Okay, now let's look at this. The Religious Freedom and Restoration, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, we all refer to it as RFRA. For the most part, RFRA protects our ministries from government intrusion. Let me define that. Just to give you an example, let's say ICE were to come in and want to take a kid. I mentioned that because that's an issue perhaps at some of our ministries. Do we have the right to tell ICE no? Well, we might. Under the under RFRA, we can say, you are infringing upon what we teach and believe because we believe in human care and we believe in the sanctity of life and blah, 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 all those things, unless the state can show, the state being the federal government or the state, if it has a RFRA companion, they have to show what's called a compelling state interest in order to break that RFRA. It's easier to do when it's a 501c3. Why? If you have a school, unless that school can clearly define its mission ministry and can show that we have ministers of religion here, it's going to be a tough road to haul, I think. They have to clearly define their purpose, direction, and boy, they better have writings between them, and if they're going to have a pastor that comes in, they better have something, because otherwise the whole 501c3 becomes a moot issue. Okay. This is the biggie. Hosanna Tabor case, most of you have probably heard about this, but real quickly, called worker, became ill, had to go on medical leave, wanted to then come back, and we had already had to, the school had to, it was an LCMS church, had to hire their replacement, and she didn't like the fact that she was out of a job. She went to the EEOC. Why is that important? Well, because as you mentioned, if you have an insurance claim, they hire an attorney for you. Well, the EEOC will engage an attorney to prosecute you if your claim is valid. So this got all the way up to the Supreme Court. What we got out of that through the holding of the court was, for Lutheran churches for sure, but all faith-based religions have the right and duty to teach, confess, and proclaim what they need to teach and confess, but they're also allowed to designate who their ministers are. In our Lutheran service, in our Lutheran churches, we know that our teachers, whether they're called, by the way, doesn't matter whether they're called, they could be contracted workers, because they're in this 508 world, we'll call it, they are automatically considered ministers. What about early learning centers, Rusty? Or what about daycare centers? Are they ministers? Well, that all depends. We can still preach to babies. God can make them hear the word, I'm sure of that. And they can be also considered, if they're part of a ministry, as being having this ministerial exception. When you go to the 501c3, again, you better document. Because if we lose that ministerial exception, then you just become a corporation. We've got to be real careful with that. All right.
Unanimous decision, by the way, from the Supreme Court. I mean, that was, they said the church is able to make its own decisions.
Well, and what was really good for the LCMS part of it, it said, you can't, the church body has the right to proclaim what it's going to teach and confess, and we're not going to get in there and start interacting with your grievances. So that works out well. So again, in terms of insurance, usually the church and the school as a 508, they're pretty much on the same policy, but they just have these different limits on both sides, right? 501c3 has to have its own insurance, and that can be expensive because you're going to need liability insurance, you're going to have renter's insurance, you're going to have errors and omissions, owners and officers, insurance, and these types.
Yeah.
Right now, insurance in many states is really hard to come by because there's so many carriers going broke from all the catastrophes that we've had in the country.
Which, if I can chime in
Please.
just for a second on that one, I always tell schools it's a good idea to talk to your insurance agent every year to make sure that you have
Absolutely.
the proper coverage, because it changes
Yes.
so much, and the time you don't ask is the time something happens and there's a claim, and is
It's
it
too late
covered?
now.
Is it not?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And here's the thing, not only talk to your agent, read the policy.
Yes.
And you don't have to read it, folks. Most of you are completely competent and able to do that, but you can always send it to an attorney. Send it to someone at the Lutheran Legal League, and what we'll do is we'll go through and say, okay, here's your exemptions. That's really what you want to know. What are my exemptions? If somebody brings a cat on the campus and somebody's allergic to cats, is that covered? No, you have a pet exemption. You just got to know that stuff. So look at your policy. Let's go to the next slide. So which structure is going to be best? That's the question you asked me, Al, when you said, can you help walk us through this thing? I don't know the answer to that question because it depends on what your objectives are. If you're wanting to have complete autonomy and you're sick and tired of the old blue hairs in the church trying to tell us how to run a school and they don't know what they're doing, 501c3 is the best for you.
Yeah.
However, if you're trying to create a ministry of part of the church ministry, then I recommend a 508. It has its challenges, but there's ways to overcome the challenge. We had one of our ministries in Florida was a school, and the school was not being fully funded by the congregation, and they were having issues, so they went out and started a foundation. They went to Lutheran Foundation. They started a foundation. It got funded through the community, and now they are able to subsidize some of the cost of the school through this foundation. Beautiful idea, so something for you to think about. And then if you are concerned, and I don't want you to hear me wrong, I don't mean if you're concerned more about the money than the ministry. But money, let's be honest, it has to play a role because teachers are not going to all volunteer their time, and the electric company's going to expect to get paid.
Well, we always say no margin, no mission, right? So
Well, that's right.
You have to have finances to operate properly.
Correct. And so you have to figure out how important is that funding. Do we want to go out and get grants? Do we want to go out and try and get outside of the Lutheran Church to get money? Folks, there's nothing wrong with doing that today. And there's many, in fact, we'll talk about it another time, probably up at SLED. There's grants that we can get right now to take care of some of the expensive items like disaster relief grants, but for faith-based organizations to come in and replace your security systems. I think we talked about that one time.
Yes.
Advertising grants. Google Ad has a grant of up to $10,000 worth of advertising dollars every month. How many of you are taking advantage of that? If you're not, you should. It's free. So anyway, something to think about. And then, again, if you're worried, if you're okay with the church funding, which typically has worked for how many years we've been?
176.
176 years, it's worked. It's a tried and true process. We may in the future need to have an opportunity to think outside the box because money's going to get tighter before it gets looser, I suspect. So we need to think outside the box. And then you have to look at your long-term growth. If the idea is we want to have our main mission here, then just stay at 508. Don't change it. But if we want to grow it, I want to have a satellite school in Main Street, USA over here, and I want to move it to California, and I want to have one in Missouri, that might be a good 501c3 because now you've got the ability with that sort of a future planning. Now you get a hold of Dorothy and say, okay, this is what we want to do. That's a much better RSO framework. Much better. You cannot be an RSO unless you're a 501c3, period.
Exactly.
So one of the questions I was asked was, well, what if the church is a 501c3? Well, the church can't be an RSO. It doesn't happen that way.
Exactly.
It's not. It's not how in our bylaws. Okay, so here's what I want you to take away from this. If you've taken nothing else about this, you have to look at these legal protections because, again, if I was a CPA, I'd be talking a totally different situation here. I'm concerned about your ministries and your ability to continue to raise up workers, to coach these folks through these difficult times. And the legal protections, while they're both have legal protections, I feel much stronger with this ministerial exception for a 508 scenario than I do for a 501c3. Again, yes, we can paper up the 501, we can do that, but it's automatic with the other one. And then your operational schools, if you want that autonomy, cool. If you don't, and your financing, your funding considerations is the last thing. These things seem repetitive because it's not a lot to this. It's your decisions. You know, it's these two main things.
Well, we can find ways to overcomplicate it.
Oh, we certainly can. I'm hoping there'll be some questions because really the first thing that Al said in terms of filing a complaint, in receiving a complaint, is you contact your insurance company. Doesn't matter how stupid it is, slip and falls, ran out of toilet paper, I don't care. You call your insurance company and you get that process started. But then you get your own legal counsel. You can go through the Lutheran Legal League, or if you know somebody you trust, you can call your DP and ask them who they trust. I don't really care. Get somebody that's knowledgeable about LCMS. And the reason for that is so many churches have this the pastor owns the church, and it's completely a different feel. And so the attorneys go after them hardcore. They don't go after us as hardcore. And then what is your long-term mission alignment? Are you trying to be a separate school, or are you trying to be part of a main mission? So that's basically it.
Yeah.
So what questions do we have?
Fantastic. We'll find some questions. Let me ask Dorothy a little bit more, though, about RSOs and your recommendations, or what you're seeing in regard to this as well.
Yeah, so I think the same, just to echo what Rusty said, even school ministry, we always will say maintain that relationship and stay under your congregation. Make it part of your congregational mission and ministry. Now, that being said, yes, we have schools and even preschools, daycare programs that have RSO status, and it does. It is a process to go through. Every RSO has to renew every 5 years, and they have their requirements. The encouragement there, if you want to have RSO status as any type of a school or a preschool program, put your faith statement in your bylaws.
Amen.
And make it very strong and solid. This is exactly what we believe. And you can use the LCMS language that's online that says this is what we believe, teach, and confess. Those are those are governing documents.
That's right.
And when you get that lawsuit about anything religious, there you go. It's in our bylaws. That's what governs us.
That's right.
Takes care of us, protects us. So if you want to have RSO status, make sure those bylaws are solid on your ministry, what we believe doctrinally. Yeah. Make
And the
it
guidelines that you offer through RSO are practical for for that 501c3 as well.
Exactly.
It's really helpful.
Oh yeah, and we have good examples we can give you to follow. You can use the language. Yeah, you don't have to come up on your own with it.
Exactly. So, and I think that's a great point too. And don't forget about protecting your ministry that's online. We have legal resources. If you go to lcms.org, look for the legal resources that the Synod has put forth for all of you to take a look at and learn from. Protecting your ministry that's online, that was developed by the Alliance to Defend Freedom for LCMS schools. Specifically with faith statements and teacher contracts, and I mean, you name it, for that protection. And I always say reach out to, district first and foremost, and have that communication, ask those questions. If you're an RSO, or if you're thinking about becoming an RSO, reach out to Dorothy and ask about becoming an RSO and some of these questions that you have with what that means, and documents and samples. She has those all the time. Dorothy and I talk all the time too when it comes to schools, or she gets a call or I get a call. We want to communicate so that we are on the right page or knowledgeable what's going on. And then you have resources out there like Lutheran Legal League as well. And there's just so many places to go that people are there to help you and guide you. And if they don't know the answer to a question, they'll help in trying to figure that out, because they know this won't be the last time someone asks a question. And again, this is why we're having this today,
Right.
Because we've had an influx of so many questions. And to be honest, you know, the 508 that everybody's been asking about, I'm like, what in the world is,
I know,
where's this
right?
coming from? And again, it's just, but those are great questions because people ask it, so
Yes.
we have knowledge of it and we get it out there so everybody kind of communicates with one another.
Can I just speak to two things? It's really important you said something, and I want to underscore it, emphasize it, and push it. If your DP doesn't know what's going on, and I end up having to call the DP looking for somebody, he's like, well, who is this? Why are you calling me? Why didn't the church call me? Why didn't the school call me? Your DP needs to know what's going on. They're not going to jump into it and handle it. That's not why they're there, but they need to understand, because Freeman might have already said, hey, we've dealt with this, and you've told that DP, and the DP can pass that on, resolved. The other thing is the protection that we got from ADF is amazing. One of the things that we've done to kind of further their work is, if you have a particular policy that you really want to have and it's not in that protecting your ministry guideline, which many of them aren't, reach out to me. Go through Al, reach out to me. I will help you create it, and then you share that amongst your people. There's no charge for it. I need you to make sure that whatever you need for your ministries, you have there. That's why I'm here. I'm not going to live forever, so get on it. But those are really things that are important. And Alliance Defending Freedom, Church and Ministry Alliance, Lutheran Legal League, a whole bunch of folks. There's stuff out here to help everyone.
Yeah, which is a great point. I mean, it's about the ministry.
It is.
Yep.
And
Ministry first.
exactly. So, Will, do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions, but we'll go ahead and end the live stream for our consultants.
All right. Well, if we don't have
I mean, I'm
any
good, guys,
questions.
but